Good afternoon, everyone. Please type in the chat box if you're having any trouble hearing us. We're getting started, and we're very glad to have you with us today. Welcome to this webinar about the 2018 Stevens Initiative Award Competition. My name is Henry Shepard, and I'm Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative. I'm joined today by my colleague and fellow Assistant Director of the initiative, Christine Shao. We're very pleased to provide this overview of our award competition, which we opened a few weeks ago. Over the next hour, we will give an overview of the Stevens Initiative and then discuss the eligibility and other rules for the competition, our current funding priorities, selection criteria, and budget and compliance rules. Then we will open the floor for your questions. If you have a question at any time, you may type the question in the questions box inside GoToWebinar, and we will try to address your question during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, please tell us in the chat box. Finally, we'll share a list of resources that may be helpful as you work on your application. The Stevens Initiative is an international effort to build global competence for young people in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa by growing and enhancing the field of virtual exchange. The initiative was created by the J. Christopher Stevens Fund and is an international effort to expand access to virtual exchange to build global competence and mutual understanding between young people in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa. The initiative is managed by the Aspen Institute through a cooperative agreement with the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs of the U.S. Department of State, with additional funding from the Bezos Family Foundation and the governments of Morocco and the United Arab Emirates. Private sector partners include Video and Twitter. The initiative is a lasting tribute to Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens, a public servant who dedicated himself to building understanding between people from different countries. While we do not have a strict definition of virtual exchange, the initiative believes a few principles are important to the quality of virtual exchange programs. We believe virtual exchange are programs that connect young people to learn and work together in different countries. We believe that virtual exchange should be sustained over a period of time through both asynchronous and/or synchronous communication so that the participants can build an understanding and build relationships with each other. And we believe that facilitation and supervision by trained educators or other facilitators is often very important to the quality of a virtual exchange program. The Stevens Initiative seeks to build and strengthen the field of virtual exchange through three main areas of work. First, we make grants. A clear example of our grant making is this award competition and the past awards that we've made, which we will talk about shortly. Second, we take the lessons we've learned from our grant making and from others in the field and share it with practitioners and other stakeholders so that we can become a knowledge hub to strengthen the whole field. Third, we conduct advocacy on behalf of the field with key stakeholders and policymakers so that there is greater awareness and demand for virtual exchange. As I mentioned a moment ago, this is not the Stevens Initiative's first competition. We held award competitions in 2015 and 2016, and over those competitions, we have made 22 awards for programs that are reaching over 28,000 young people in 43 U.S. states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia, as well as in 16 countries in the Middle East and North Africa, and the Palestinian territories. Let's turn now to the details of this award competition. The application submission deadline for the competition is September 13th at 11:59 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. There are no exceptions and no extensions for this deadline. This is the deadline for the first stage of the application process, which we call the Letter of Interest, or LOI form, and for some applicants, the Survey of the Field form as well, which is required of some and not of other applicants, and that will be described in more detail in a moment. It's important to note that all applications must come in through our application website, which is at aspen.fluidreview.com. All applying organizations must be based in the United States or in the Middle East or North Africa region or MENA region. You can find a list of these countries and places on the State Department website in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. US-based applicants must be tax-exempt nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions. Middle East and North Africa-based organizations must be nonprofit organizations, including educational institutions that can demonstrate current in-country registration. Other organizations are not eligible to apply as prime award applicants, though they may be included as sub-awardees or as contract recipients within an award. Staff on awardee programs should be proficient in English and able to write reports and conduct evaluations in English, as well as in Arabic or French as appropriate. Activities must be conducted in the United States and in one or more of the countries listed on this slide. As I mentioned, these countries are within the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau of the U.S. Department of State. That means that every program must include young people both in the United States as well as in one of these countries. Programs may include refugees from these countries who are not currently in these countries. These programs are also eligible and will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. Each award through this competition will have a period of performance or duration of 27 months. The awards will begin on April 1st, 2019, and end on June 30th, 2021. The first several months of the award are intended for the programs to prepare for the virtual exchange activities, which should begin during the fall 2019 academic term and should continue for 2 full academic years through the spring 2021 academic term. Participants in these programs should be young people in the age range that corresponds to the middle school, high school, undergraduate, graduate education levels, as well as young professionals under the age of 35. Educators, facilitators, and other group leaders who work with the youth participants are also counted as participants for the purposes of travel, but should not be counted as part of the youth participants number. And we'll say more about travel in a moment. We hold to what we call an 80% budget rule. Christine can speak to this in more detail later if there are questions, but simply speaking, any organization can request no more than 80% of their fiscal year 2017 operating budget. There are also additional budget constraints and ranges that we list for each of the award types, but regardless of what award type or amount being requested, that amount must not be more than 80% of the applying organization's 2017 operating budget. For the first time this competition, the Stevens Initiative is making 2 distinct types of awards: seeding awards and scaling awards. Seeding awards support promising new virtual programs at the proof of concept stage so that we can test, refine, and evaluate new models. These proposals must demonstrate the potential to find an institutional home, to replicate, and to scale in the future. Scaling awards support innovators and institutions that are already ready to expand an existing successful virtual exchange program. These proposals must demonstrate an intention and pathway to scaling up considerably while also reducing the cost per participant. So let's get into a little bit more detail about the parameters for each of these types of awards. For the seeding awards, which I mentioned first a moment ago, there is a budget range of $100,000 to $300,000 over the course of the whole duration of the award. This is the smaller award size compared to the scaling awards. The number of youth participants must be between 100 and 750 participants over the course of the award, and the cost per participant range for this award must be between $400 per person and $1,000 per person. We calculate the cost per person as being the total requested budget divided by the total number of youth participants for the purposes of this calculation. Though we understand there are maybe other ways to view this from other perspectives, but for the purpose of this calculation, we divide the budget by the number of youth participants to find the cost per participant for the purposes of this aspect of the competition. Letters of interest or applications must satisfy all of the ranges that I mentioned on this slide in order to be eligible. For applicants for seeding awards, the survey of the field, which I will mention in more detail shortly, is optional. So those seeking a seeding award may fill out the survey of the field form if they have recent experience with running virtual exchange programs, but they are not required to do so. Now let's turn to scaling awards. The budget range for scaling awards is higher. The budget range for scaling awards is $350,000 to $1 million over the course of the award. Likewise, the number of youth participants must be higher. The range is 1,000 to 8,000 participants over the course of the award. On the other hand, the cost per participant range is lower for scaling awards, since these are programs that ought to have attained a higher scale and be operating with greater efficiency. The cost per participant range for scaling awards should be within the $100 to $350 per participant. As with the seeding awards, letters and applications must satisfy all of these range requirements in order to be eligible. And unlike the seeding awards, submitting the survey of the field form, which again I'll describe in more detail in a moment, is required, and it must be submitted along with the letter of interest by the September 13th deadline if you're seeking a scaling award. The survey of the field is intended to shed light on the size and dynamics of the virtual exchange field for programs that were conducted during this past 2017-2018 academic year. As I mentioned, filling out this form is required of scaling applicants and optional for seeding applicants. I should note that the form is accessible on the same website where applicants fill out the letter of interest form, which we showed earlier, aspen.fluidreview.com, and we'll be sure to show that on the screen several more times during this presentation. Any organization that conducted virtual exchange during the 2017-2018 academic year is encouraged to fill out the form, whether or not they decide to apply for an award. And the survey of the field can cover programs that connect young people in the United States with young people in the Middle East and North Africa, or with any other part of the world. So any form of international virtual exchange is eligible to be submitted in the survey of the field form, even though the Stevens Initiative is only able to provide awards for organizations connecting young people in the United States and the Middle East and North Africa. What we're seeking here is a greater understanding of what is happening out there in the field of virtual exchange, and we think this is a really exciting way for all of us to better understand the size of the field and the dynamics of the field. So we're really excited to roll out this new opportunity to share and learn from each other. After the letters of interest are submitted, they are reviewed and scored by an independent committee of experts from related fields, from education, from exchange, from online education, from international development, and many other fields. Some organizations will be invited to submit a full application later this fall, we expect in October, which asks for more information about the proposed program, including a detailed budget, timeline, and many other details. So again, the letter of interest is the first stage of a two-stage process. The letter of interest, and for some, the survey of the field is the first stage, due on September 13th. After the letters of interest are reviewed, some organizations will be invited to submit a full application later this fall, after which a small number of organizations will be offered an award. We've identified several topics that are priorities for this competition. We seek to support programs that have young people working together on technology and computing, world affairs and global studies, business and entrepreneurship, language learning and practice. These, we recognize, are sometimes overlapping topics, but we think it's very important for applicants to identify which of these topics is the primary focus of their proposal and to not spread their attention too thin over these various topics. The program is not necessarily stronger the more topics it seeks to cover. But all of these we identify as being priorities that will help young people in the United States, as well as in the Middle East and North Africa, build the skills and the understanding that they need to succeed in the workforce and to thrive in their societies. There's much more information about how we understand and view these topics in the competition website. So I encourage you, again, to go to the competition website to read more about these topics. We also have made it a priority to reach diverse participants, particularly those who have had less access to exchange opportunities in the past. These include women and girls, underserved youth in other categories whose access to international exchange has been limited. And on the competition website, we identify several categories and areas where this is true both in the United States as well as in the Middle East and North Africa, such as in the United States, those attending minority-serving institutions and community colleges, or schools that are Title I eligible or that have a high proportion of Pell eligible students in the Middle East and North Africa, public institutions or institutions where English is not the primary language of instruction. We also have a priority to reach refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. And as I mentioned, these may be people who are located outside the Middle East and North Africa region, but whose origins are in that region. We also make it a priority to reach young people with disabilities and to reach other minority groups who have been underserved through international exchange opportunities. We've also identified what we call some invitational priorities. We are particularly interested in seeing programs that propose to reach participants and institutions in Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Libya, and in the Palestinian territories, recognizing the challenges that people in these places often have in seeking exchange opportunities and opportunities to engage with peers in the United States. We also seek programs that would involve intra-regional interaction, such as between Israeli participants and those in other countries in the Middle East and North Africa. These programs must still include participants in the United States, since U.S. MENA region dialogue is at the bedrock of how we view the Stevens Initiative and virtual exchange. Finally, we are interested in seeing proposals that include a community engagement or community service component. We've also set aside some resources in this competition for a few organizations to conduct impact evaluation. These additional resources would be for a few awardees to conduct either a randomized control trial, to take a quasi-experimental design, or to vary a key aspect of their program, such as the length of the program, the number of contact hours, or some other aspect of the program, so that we can better understand the effect of that program design on the experience for participants. Recipients of the supplement should have experience evaluating virtual exchange and should demonstrate the capacity to be able to conduct an impact evaluation. The supplemental budget for this aspect of work will be between $50,000 and $125,000 over the course of the award. As with many other aspects of the competition, I strongly encourage you to look up the details listed on the competition website, because this is just a very cursory overview, and there are many more details and eligibility expectations that we list there that will help you decide whether it is a good fit to pursue the impact evaluation supplement. Next, I'd like to talk about the selection criteria that we've identified for this competition. These are largely consistent with the selection criteria that we've used in the past, and they include the feasibility of the proposed program, the capacity of the organization to conduct the work, the degree to which the proposal addresses one of the priority topics I listed earlier, the degree to which the proposed program reaches diverse participants, which I listed as well, the degree to which the program addresses and builds the global competencies of the participants, as well as the degree to which the proposed program builds the practical skills, including vocational and technical skills, of the proposed participants, the degree to which the proposal establishes a clear need by the participants and their communities for the project, the degree to which the program appeals to the young people and others who will be involved in the program, and also the degree to which the proposal reflects a vision for growth and sustainability for the project after the Stevens Initiative support would have ended. I'd like to turn it over now to Christine Shao, the other Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative, to talk about some budget and compliance aspects of the program.
Thank you, Henry, and hello, everyone. I will briefly touch on some budgeting compliance requirements and terminology that will hopefully be helpful information for you, and at the very least, very good context as you begin to develop and refine your letters of interest, your program plans, and budgets. As Henry mentioned, Our funding comes from the Department of State, and as such, the funds are governed by very specific regulations. These regulations are listed within the Uniform Guidance, which is basically a U.S. government-wide framework for grants management. If you have the time or feel so inclined, you may wish to familiarize yourself with these regulations, although it is not required at this time. The next slide has some very technical language on it. It highlights that the Aspen Institute is the managing partner of the STEAMS initiative and is considered the pass-through entity. If and when your proposal is approved for funding, you will become a subrecipient to the Aspen Institute and required to adhere to the guidance mentioned in the prior slides. As you think about your budget, note that any cost that you propose should align with the proposal and meet the following criteria. They should be allowable, reasonable, allocable, and necessary to conduct the activities outlined. To briefly go over these definitions, allowable means that the cost should adhere to the federal cost principles and have consistent treatment through generally accepted accounting principles. Reasonable, meaning that an objective individual would agree that the cost is appropriate for the work proposed and must be able to withstand public scrutiny and is necessary to complete the proposed work. Allocable, costs incurred to support the work outlined in the award and again be necessary to conduct the work. On the next slide, we have examples of some disallowed costs and relatedly on face value some allowable costs as well. Examples of disallowed costs are entertainment costs and alcohol, and some examples of allowable costs are personnel and fringe, travel, facilitator and educator support, professional development, technology fees, and curriculum development and maintenance, to name a few. The next slide outlines the main cost categories. Any activity or cost that is proposed must fall under one of these cost categories. At this stage, you are not being asked to submit a budget, but again, it's good framing for you to have. Some questions that will be helpful for you to think about, because it may be the bulk of your budget request, is what personnel are essential to carrying out the program and what percentage of their time is needed. You should also think about your implementing partners and begin those discussions around what it will take on their end to help successfully implement the program. Again, the cost categories are personnel, staff travel, participant support, supplies, contractual, and subaward, and noting here that there is a difference between contractual and subaward. And if you have any questions about this, you can feel free to reach out to us and we can explain that in more detail. The next category would be other direct costs. And finally, we have the indirect cost category, sometimes known as your NICRA and/or overhead costs. Indirect costs, again, are sometimes referred to as overhead costs. Essentially, if you have a NICRA, which is a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement between you and the U.S. federal government, the Aspen Institute is required to acknowledge your NICRA. If you do not have a NICRA and you have never received one from the federal government, then you are automatically eligible to receive the 10% de minimis rate. If you do not want to elect a 10% de minimis rate, you may elect to negotiate a rate with the Aspen Institute. The very last slide touches on cost share, and it basically says that it is voluntary, and if you decide to include it on your budget eventually, it must be allowable cost and verifiable from your financial records. That is all I have for the budget and compliance piece at this point. I think we will open it up for question and answers.
Thanks so much, Christine. As you mentioned, we're turning it to the question and answer section of our presentation. We thankfully have a lot of time reserved to go through all of your questions to the extent that we are able. If there are any questions that we're not able to answer today or that we run out of time and simply don't have the time to answer, we pledge to review all of the questions we receive and follow up with those who ask them, as well as to add to the frequently asked questions list on our application website so that you can review the questions that were addressed here, as well as any others that might come in outside of this webinar. So we'll begin by talking about a few of the questions that have already been typed into the questions field. As we mentioned earlier, the way that you should be submitting a question is in the questions box inside the GoToWebinar program. Several of you have already typed questions here, and I hope that many others will come in as we're answering the first questions. So give us a moment while we review the questions and get started. First, we see a question from Carrie, who asks, will we send out a copy of the webinar? and we will be very glad to post a recording of this webinar on our website and YouTube channel and share it through various social media platforms so that anyone who wants to review it later or who was unable to view it in real time is able to review the webinar like those who were able to view it in real time. We are also discussing holding an additional webinar in the future, which we would announce through our social media, email, and other channels for those who are interested in attending another webinar. We have a question from Elizabeth who asks, where can we obtain information on the process for negotiating an indirect rate with Aspen? Christine?
What I will do is I will add a section to the FAQs that we already have posted, and I will outline the process for that. But essentially what you'll need to do is substantiate your claim for the request. If you have an indirect cost rate that is higher than 10%, I'll need to see the financials essentially from the last 3 years, showing what your base rate is, or rather your base for collecting indirect costs, and send those to me, and we can go from there.
We have another question related to finance and compliance, and that is, not quite sure what a, quote, pass-through is, what that means regarding the Aspen Institute. Can you please explain better what a pass-through means and how the Aspen Institute plays that role?
Sure. It essentially means that as the pass-through entity, we are required to adhere to all of the prime award requirements that are listed in our Department of State agreement, and we pass down and flow down those requirements to you as a subrecipient of us, as we are the pass-through entity. And as such, I'll just add to that, it is also our responsibility to make sure that you're adhering to all of those requirements as well. And so, later on, we'll have another webinar kind of on compliance that will explain what are the steps that we take to ensure that you all are doing what you're supposed to be doing in terms of the award agreement.
Thanks, Christine. We have another question. Approximately how long will those asked to submit a full proposal have to prepare the full proposal? As I mentioned, the full proposal is the second stage of the application process, which we expect to open sometime this fall, likely in October. And we expect those invited to submit a full proposal to have somewhere around 5 to 6 weeks, although that's still being finalized. Thanks very much for the question. There's another question from Julie. Is it okay for a U.S. university to partner with more than one educational institution in the Middle East? Yes, it is permissible to partner with more than one institution, whether this is at the secondary education level, higher education level, or any other eligible age level. Organizations may work with more than one partner, although we recognize the technical and logistical complexity of working with several partners can make larger programs challenging. But the short answer to your question, Julie, is yes. We have a question asking, when proposing to work with refugees outside the MENA region, does the definition of refugee include asylum seekers and those with humanitarian protected status? This is something that we would probably want to consider on a case-by-case basis, and so we'd be glad to entertain any further detailed questions and to review any specific cases as they might arise. But generally speaking, I think we take a broad view of who we're trying to reach, as long as they are young people from the Middle East and North Africa. So we encourage anyone with particularly tricky cases to approach us with any specific questions. When we talk about refugees, we're using the term, I think, in a somewhat broad sense. But again, as I say, we would want to talk through the details of any particular case and make sure that it meets the expectations that we have as well as the expectations of our partners. We have a question asking that we mentioned that virtual exchange activities should begin during the fall 2019 academic term, and this person asks, can virtual exchange activities begin in summer 2019? From past experience, we feel it is extremely important that programs have adequate time to start their partnerships with their international partners, set up their monitoring and evaluation system, train their educators, design their curriculum, test their technology. We think it's very important that programs take several months after the period of performance begins in order to put all of these plans in place We are, of course, open to considering any unique cases, but at this point, we strongly urge and plan to hold to the plan for programs to begin their virtual exchange activities only in fall 2019. We also have a question here asking if an organization can submit a proposal for both the seeding and scaling awards, which goes to a larger question, which is whether an organization can apply for more than one award. Keep in mind, so the short answer to this is an organization may put in more than one letter of interest. Those could be either seeding or scaling. It's important that any proposal or any set of proposals not be overlapping in their substance, in the work or staff that would be involved, that they be for completely distinct work, such that if one of them were accepted but not the other, that remaining program would be able to be conducted. And also so that if both proposals were accepted, that both of them could be conducted without overburdening the organization that put in both proposals. So the short answer is yes, an organization may pursue more than one letter of interest. Thanks for those questions. We have a question asking, is it expected that a project is conducted with a partner organization? And further, what are your expectations about engaging partners? Given the international nature of this work, nearly all of the plausible proposals that we have seen over the past several years have involved a certain degree of international partnership. I suppose an organization that has very deep roots and high capacity, both in the United States as well as in the Middle East and North Africa, might be able to put together a feasible proposal that shows adequate capacity in all countries, or a proposal could seek to use staff and effort solely in one country and then remotely connect with participants in another country. But these would be outlier cases, and we would encourage the organization to make sure that they have adequate capacity, whether their own or through a partnership, in all of the places where they propose to reach young people. Thanks very much for that helpful question. There was a clarifying question, and I want to come back to this in case I wasn't clear enough, but I think someone wanted to clarify whether an organization could submit both a seeding and a scaling award, and the broader answer is yes. Mm-hmm. An organization may submit more than one letter of interest, and they may be a seeding and a scaling proposal, or both seeding or both scaling, but as I mentioned, any set of proposals must be completely distinct from each other, as well as things that if the organization received both awards, that the organization could actually conduct both sets of work. Thanks for the clarification. We have a question asking whether for the number of participants, are we including both the US and the MENA participants as a total number? And the answer is yes. The numbers we listed in those ranges is the total number of young people who would be reached over the course of the whole program. And I should further clarify that any young person who participates over more than one semester should just be counted once. So that if there is a year-long exchange over multiple semesters and the Stevens Initiative were to ask the awardee how many people participated in the fall and how many in the spring, if the same individual participated for both of those semesters, that would count as just one individual participating, because we're trying to reach as many young people as we can with this special experience. So yes, we are counting US and MENA participants as a total in those ranges. We have a question asking what our expectations are about in-person components of a program. Are they encouraged and expected, or is 100% virtual programs acceptable? We do allow, and in some cases encourage, in-person exchange as a complementary part of a virtual exchange program, recognizing the great value of in-person contact for international exchange. This is particularly true for programs that want to have in-person exchange for the educators or facilitators who will be conducting the program for the young people involved, although travel for the young people as a complement to the virtual activities, such as following their experience in the virtual exchange as a capstone experience, is also eligible and allowable. The Stevens Initiative has supported some in-person exchange components in the past, and we expect that we will do so again in the future. So yes, in-person exchange is allowable. We have another question for you, Christine. Mm-hmm. Someone would like to know the difference between a subaward and a contract.
Sure. A subaward is going to be an agreement/contract, however you want to frame it. It's a mechanism used to pay organizations to do a substantial part of the work, i.e. they have programmatic decision-making sort of power and authority over the program. As such, they're an equal partner to the type of work that you are conducting. A contractor, on the other hand, is someone who essentially is giving you deliverables and or a service. You could think of this as an example, a video deliverable, someone that you're contracting out to make a video for you, or a curriculum development. That could be something that would be most likely considered a contractor. If you have an evaluator on your budget, those are people that would be falling under a contractual versus subaward. So again, the key thing is here, do they have programmatic decision-making power? And if they do, typically, usually, they will be considered a subrecipient and have a subaward agreement with you.
We have a multi-part question about the cost per participant, which the person asking the question accurately points out is a new component of the parameters of the competition this time around. And the person asks whether we have a budget sample that we can provide, or whether funds can be shared with international partner institutions. So to answer the second part of the question first, yes, funds may be given to international partner institutions as part of Stevens Initiative Awards. We are not providing a budget template at this stage since a full budget is not required at the letter of interest phase. However, we will provide a budget template at the full application stage when we will have much clearer guidance and strict expectations about how we expect a budget to be submitted and what costs we expect to be covered. Thanks very much for those questions.
We have a quick question, Henry, on who grantees report to, whether it's the Aspen Institute or it's the State Department. And the answer is to the Aspen Institute. If you, as a subrecipient, have any questions, you will reach out directly to us, the Aspen Institute, and we can field those questions to the State Department. As such, any subrecipients on your specific budget, the questions will go to them, and they would flow up to us, and so forth.
I'll go back to a discussion that we had a moment ago about allowable travel expenditures. We have a question asking to clarify, when we say that travel is allowable, could that include the students themselves to travel, or is it virtual only programming for young people? And to clarify, and I'm sorry it wasn't clearer before, yes, travel or in-person exchange is allowable for students in Stevens Initiative programs. I believe the minimum age for in-person exchange in our programs is Christine, can you remind me, do we have a minimum age established?
There isn't a minimum age, but there are certain and more strict requirements if you have minors travel, and we can get into more detail about that later when we need to.
Great, thanks. So yes, travel is permissible for young people involved in the program as well as for educators and facilitators. And we do allow that as we have in the past. Thanks for the question. We have a question asking whether past funded projects are listed somewhere online so that they can refer to them as successful examples. Yes, we encourage anyone seeking more information about the Stevens Initiative or any of the programs we've supported to visit our website, which we will flash on a future slide, stevensinitiative.org. That's a separate website from the website for the competition itself, but also has many great resources, which we'll list in a few minutes. So if you want to see the list of all of the projects we funded in the past, as well as a brief overview of those programs, please go to stevensinitiative.org. Thanks for a great question.
We have a question regarding the purchasing of headsets and webcams for partner universities in the MENA region. Would those types of costs, supplies such as headsets and webcams, fall under supply category of the word? I'm sorry, the answer is yes. They would technically fall under supply if the individual value of that headset and those webcams fall under $5,000 or less. And if they do, they would fall under the supply category.
Christine, I have another question about expenditures. Someone asks whether the funding can be used to purchase refreshments for student participants. What are the parameters for purchasing food and refreshments?
You know, I think it's a case-by-case basis. Generally, it could be something that's allowable if the reasons for purchasing the refreshments are because there's some sort of, as an example, a training that all the participants are actively engaged in, and refreshments and or food are needed to keep the participants engaged. And if you didn't bring in food and refreshments, it might kind of obstruct the training. So in instances, yes, it can be righted and can be allowable on a case-by-case basis.
I know we're skipping around between different topics pretty quickly, but we are getting questions on so many different components of the program, and we're trying to cover them in some semblance of order. We have a question asking, what's the reasoning behind having an age cap at 35, which was listed as the age cap for young professionals involved in the program? Our understanding of the scope of our work is that we're trying to reach young people who are change agents in their countries and will have an impact of many years throughout their careers and time in life, public life. And that's why we seek to reach young people. We know there are many programs such as universities or other programs that reach young professionals that might have some participants who are older than 35. The intention, again, is not to strictly exclude these people, but to focus on reaching young people as we understand that term. Programs that have a unique situation that they'd like to discuss with the Stevens Initiative or would like to explain in their proposal are welcome to do so, but must keep in mind that our purpose is to reach young people as we see it. Thanks for the question. I see a question here asking whether it's possible to include partnerships for a program that includes partners in the Middle East and North Africa and the United States, as well as in another region. And unfortunately, Stevens Initiative funding may only be used to support activities in the Middle East and North Africa and in the United States. So any other countries that might be involved in an organization's program cannot be covered through any Stevens Initiative funding. If you have any further questions, please do follow up with us, but the answer to that is no, we cannot support activities in any third countries, with the one exception of if those activities are reaching young people who are refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, that might be acceptable.
We have a question regarding academic credit for virtual exchange and whether or not, I think it's a clarifying question on if we refer to the academic credit being for UNES universities, or if it could be for Middle Eastern universities and for those students. And the answer is it could potentially be for both. I think in past, we've seen it's good to have a balance and good incentive for all students and academic credit on both sides, whether the US or Middle East or North Africa. That would also be beneficial for those students as well.
Christine, we have a question about tuition. Is tuition an allowable expense, for example, for a university level program?
I'm sorry, I think I need a little bit more clarity on that question.
Okay. I think the question is just whether if a person is participating in virtual exchange, can their tuition fees be covered by the Stevens?
No, their tuition fees, it would not be an allowable cost. We would not cover the cost of tuition. No.
Another person asks whether a Fulbrighter or someone on the Fulbright exchange program already in one of the countries that are eligible could they participate if with a stipend, for example, in a project? We are very intent on working with other Department of State and other international exchange programs to make the best possible use of the insights and opportunities that those programs afford to young Americans as well as young people from other countries. And so young people from the United States who are on an exchange program in the Middle East and North Africa may be involved in the program. Young people from the Middle East and North Africa may be involved in the program if they're in the United States. But keep in mind that the primary purpose of the program is to connect young people who haven't already had an international exchange experience. And so any young person, for example, from the United States living or studying in the Middle East and North Africa would be doing so not as a primary beneficiary of the program, but as someone who's helping facilitate and extend the program and enrich the program for other participants who haven't already had the opportunity to travel themselves. I hope that makes some sense, and we'd be happy to consider any further cases on a case-by-case basis.
We have a question regarding counting in-kind contribution as part of the calculation of cost per participant. As Henry said, we're going to give you all more guidance on what this calculation looks like, but essentially, no, cost share and in-kind contributions are not considered in your calculation of cost per participant. We have a question about whether a program that includes substantial work in a country outside the United States or the Middle East and North Africa, such as a program based in West Africa,
would be eligible, and unfortunately, we are not able to support programs or activities or make awards to organizations based outside the Middle East and North Africa or the United States.
We have a question regarding whether or not it is okay, and I'm sorry if we covered this already, to submit a letter of interest as a lead, and whether or not you can also participate as a sub or a junior partner. And the answer to that is technically, yes, you can. You can submit a letter of interest as a lead and be listed as a junior partner. I think things to consider are whether or not you as an organization or you as an individual have the capacity to conduct that work, and or if you are selected to be a part of both. Those are the types of things that we'll be thinking of as well.
We have a few questions about the priority topics, and I'll try to address them together. For example, one person asks whether a program that provides social and emotional skills is eligible through a certain curriculum. Another asks whether a STEM-focused program would be eligible. We had listed STEM-focused programs as a Stevens Initiative priority in the past. And this is a good opportunity to reiterate that we've identified a few areas and topics as being particular priorities for the Stevens Initiative at this stage. We think it will be very beneficial to the virtual exchange field for us to focus our funds in a few key topic areas that we think are very ripe for rapid expansion of virtual exchange. That's why we've identified technology and computing, business and entrepreneurship, world affairs and global studies, and language learning and practice as particular priorities at this stage. Programs that overlap with one of these topics, and I think social and emotional skills certainly does overlap to a degree. I think that STEM and technology and computing overlap to a degree. These proposals, as well as proposals on any topic, are eligible to apply. We're very interested in seeing any proposal that an organization may wish to submit. As I mentioned, addressing one of our priority topics is a selection criterion that our independent committee will be scoring for. So it's really up to the applicant to make the strongest case possible that the program addresses one of our priority topics, whether directly or partially, and whether the program gives young people the global competencies and the practical, vocational, and technical skills that we think virtual exchange can help them build. So this is a way of saying we think it is important to overlap with priority topics. We are also flexible, seeing proposals on tangential or even unrelated topics if those proposals have great merit. And thanks for those questions.
We have a question on whether or not additional funds contributed to a project are necessary, and whether or not they should be designed to fit within the grant amount for the Stevens Initiative. So I think if I'm understanding this correctly, the question is, if you have a partner organization that wants to contribute on cost share, whether or not that is allowable. And the answer is yes, but it is not necessary and or required.
We have a question asking when programs will be notified if they will receive a Stevens Initiative award. I should have mentioned earlier in the presentation that organizations will first be offered the opportunity to discuss and negotiate towards reaching an agreement on an award with the Stevens Initiative, and we expect that process to commence late in 2018, recognizing that the process can take several weeks or in some cases months, given all of the vetting and due diligence and negotiations that may be involved, so that we expect organizations to know well in advance of the April 1st period of performance start that they are on track and being considered for an award. We expect organizations to have plenty of time to get all of their details and logistics set up for that April 1st start.
We have a question about purchasing supplies and what happens when the supplies are purchased and whether or not they need to be returned back to the US-based organization. The simple and quick answer is that if you purchase supplies for a MENA-based organization and you ship the supplies there, they do not have to be returned to the US organization. I think the idea behind that is either one, they're going to be used, and so there's not going to be anything returned. If you're talking specifically about purchasing, as an example, some sort of technical or technology, as like an iPad as an example, that also would not need to be returned to the US-based organizations. The intent, however, is that it should continue to be used in the spirit of which the item was purchased.
We have a question about whether there will be future funding opportunities, and while we can't say with any certainty what the future holds, as you can see, we've held regular or semi-regular award competitions, and we endeavor and hope to be able to do so. So it's not our expectation that this is the last Stevens Initiative competition, though of course any organization interested in receiving support, we strongly encourage you to consider submitting an application at this time. Christine, we have a question that maybe you and I both should try to answer collectively, which is, does the project have to be for the full duration of the stated award, 27 months, or can it be shorter time period within that period?
I mean, the answer is essentially we want it to be conducted within that time period. No, we don't want a shorter time period. We would like it to be conducted within those date ranges.
The rationale for having an award last 27 months is that we think that once a program is established, once the initial investments in facilitator training and curriculum design and technology and so many other components have been made, that it becomes much smoother and easier to maintain those partnerships, to continue programming, and to reach many more young people at ever greater efficiency. That's why we think it's so important to give organizations the time to plan and iterate and expand. We certainly can't rule out any scenarios that you might present that would very clearly demonstrate why a different or shorter period of performance would be absolutely necessary. And so you're welcome to raise those questions with us one-on-one. But as I mentioned, we don't, and as Christine mentioned, we don't anticipate making awards that last less than 27 months. Recognizing that virtual exchange programming cannot be happening every single day of that period. As we already mentioned, we don't expect activities to start until several months into the award in 2019.
Henry, we have a question from an awardee about evaluation. Shall I read the question out loud?
Please.
It says, for the impact evaluation supplement, does this need to be co-designed with the Stevens Initiative External Evaluator, RTI, or by the implementer? That's the first part of the question. And also, for the potential additional $50,000, does that need to be an independent budget, or can it also support program and staffing that it supports M&E?
The first part of the question, any organization selected or any organization that is told through the letter of interest phase that they should proceed to submitting a more detailed impact evaluation supplement at the full application phase will get feedback and further prompts from the Stevens Initiative and its independent evaluators. And that will be an opportunity to essentially work towards a practical plan. So the applying organization should be putting forward its best ideas. And you should keep in mind that as the plan solidifies, if it is accepted or if it is moving towards being accepted, that the Stevens Initiative and its partners would provide ample input, and that the initiative's independent evaluators would be substantially involved in overseeing and conducting the impact evaluation, though we would expect the awardee to take a substantial role. And for the additional funds, for the $50,000 to $125,000, I'm not sure I'm answering the question as directly as I should, but those funds should be used specifically and wholly for any additional work on the impact evaluation. That means that the main part of the budget may include some smaller amount of funds for a baseline monitoring and evaluation, which is expected of all awardees. And any funds requested through the supplement should be very clearly tied to the additional effort that would be needed for the more rigorous impact evaluation. And we certainly encourage anyone interested in this supplement to contact us with any further questions they might have. We realize that as one of the more complex aspects of the proposal process. I'll try to cover a few more questions related to the impact evaluation supplement. It says, we have a question here saying that the person understands that each treatment group should have at least 60 students per term, 30 from each region. They ask, should the control group also have at least 60 students? I'm sorry, so I read it wrong. So asking about the relative size of treatment and control group. I think for now, the organizations applying for the supplement should rely on the instructions we've given in the framework in the application website. If you get stuck and have any further questions, please do email us for a more detailed explanation, but it might come down to our giving more specific advice based on the circumstances of each proposal. So please do follow up if you have any more detailed questions about the randomized control trial or quasi-experimental design. Christine, are there any more questions that have cropped up that you'd like to try to answer?
Not at this juncture, no.
We have a question asking whether the Stevens Initiative can help finding international partners. I think the short answer is we're not able to help finding international partners during the open competition phase that we're in right now, because it's very important to us to treat all potential applicants fairly and equitably. But once we have identified our awardees and have announced them, we will try to include organizations and schools and universities in our awardees programs where feasible, if there's a good fit. So we're not able to provide support right now in order to be fair to all applicants, but we are very intent on helping any non-applicants or any unsuccessful applicants get integrated in one of the virtual exchange programs we support, if possible, at a later date. We have a question about whether pre-service teachers would be considered as youth participants and how to think about professional development. I think this probably varies on a program-by-program basis, but we have seen proposals where pre-service teachers did make a lot of sense as the youth participants, and so it's conceivable that that could be the case. And training pre-service teachers could indeed be a very effective way to train the next generation of virtual exchange facilitators by giving them the very international experience that we want people to have. So thanks for that very good question. Christine, did you already address any questions about in-kind contributions or cost share?
I think so, yes.
Okay,
yep.
Thanks.
We've addressed that.
Someone asks whether providing a letter of support from a partner institution is helpful at the letter of interest phase. For the sake of keeping the letter of interest phase contained and not overly burdensome for our applicants or for our review committee, we do not expect letters of support at this stage. However, at a later stage, there may be time to or space to include such letters of support or statements of support for an application. Christine, do I have that right?
Yep, that's right.
Thanks very much. We have a question about what to do when seeking further information or feedback, and we would encourage you to follow the steps listed on this slide. For more information about the Stevens Initiative, please go to stevensinitiative.org or check out our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter. We have several resources related to virtual exchange on our website at stevensinitiative.org/resources. With any further questions, please email us at stevensinitiative@aspeninst.org. And as we mentioned earlier, for those interested in reading the application, reading the guidelines, and starting their application, please go to aspen.fluidreview.com. There's a link here on this page, on this screen, where you can also see the specific URL that you should visit to see the frequently asked questions. There are probably there's several more questions that we unfortunately did not have time to address during this webinar, and we will be very glad to try to answer those questions as best we can and add them to the frequently asked questions page, as we will many of the questions we posed today. Christine?
I just had one more thing I wanted to say and to thank everyone for joining us today, and it's that we are going to be hosting a second webinar on August the 30th at 10:00 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm saying this to you all if you want to attend again, but to also apologize because you will be receiving another email from us inviting you to attend this webinar. So just wanted to put that out there and to let you know that we look forward to chatting with you all soon.
As Christine said, we're very thankful that you took the time to join this webinar. Thank you for all your great questions, for your interest in the Stevens Initiative, and for helping us build and leading the building of the virtual exchange field. Final information, as a reminder, the competition website is aspen.fluidreview.com. The submission deadline for letters of interest and for the survey of the field form for those for whom it's required is September 13th. Please email us or send us a message through social media if you have any questions or comments. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.